I'm Rachel Foles, Director of Digital Marketing for Cerkl. Here's how this is going to work today. If you have a question, just enter it in the chat box. We're going to keep the questions private, so you don't have to be nervous to ask any question. We're going to record this webinar, and we're going to send everyone a link once it's over to a YouTube video. And if you're having any trouble whatsoever, just call the number on your screen, and one of our engagement specialists are going to walk you through. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we're here. Cerkl's been diligently studying engagement for the past 4 years. Engagement is our business and our passion. We're working with 500 organizations, and we have millions of points of data telling the engagement story every single day. We're all here because our employees feel underwater, and really, can you blame them? Look at the volume of noise they have to cut through each minute just to hear your messages. In reading the pre-webinar survey responses, everyone's feeling the exact same pain. It seemed like the same thing coming up over and over again. You want to know how to keep your staff motivated. You want to know about how to engage your employees, retain your employees. A lot of you are dealing with a merged organization and how to manage through that change. You want to recognize your employees and show them big technology changes, make them feel comfortable. You want to improve your culture because you know how important that is. And you want to understand engagement and conflict management. So these are all challenges that we're all facing. And the good news is that I have just the pro for the job. We're so lucky to have Maureen Donnellan, VP at MPI Consulting here today. Maureen is a consultant to executive leadership, senior management, and HR teams for small to mid-cap companies, organizations in healthcare, manufacturing, distribution, higher education, municipalities, and other industries across the United States. Maureen, you sound busy. Her specialties include strategic consulting, cultural transformation, leadership development, employee engagement, performance management, and corporate communication strategy. In 2011, she joined MPI Consulting, and together with President and CEO John Hawkins, has led MPI's leadership development, workplace culture, and employee engagement capability areas for the last 6 years. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm very pleased to be here.
Though companies and leaders worldwide recognize the advantages of engaging employees, and many have instituted surveys to measure engagement, employee engagement has barely budged in well over a decade. And I see this a lot in the Gallup surveys that come out and things like that. So as a result, many companies are attempting to increase engagement by focusing on problems that may not affect engagement or by tackling problems in the wrong order. We're going to talk about that today. The good news is that your employees are very interested in what you have to say. 3 out of 4 want to stay up to date on your organization's business. That's wonderful. Are they hearing you? Businesses are having trouble getting their employee messages to resonate, and here's why. The messages aren't tailored to their interests, they're too frequent, or they just don't look good on their phone or their tablet or their computer or wherever they're viewing them. Businesses are struggling with the exact same issue, and the most successful businesses have figured out that they need to cut through the noise to survive. If you look around Netflix, Amazon, Pandora, etc., they all share one thing. They look at a person's behavior to learn more about them and then personalize that experience. But the problem is that most institutions don't have the resources to provide that kind of personalization. And that's what Cerkl is able to do for an institution. So Maureen, tell me about MPI and how they approach change.
Well, Rachel, in addition to the things that you've pointed out, we've also found through our work as our consultants that most companies' efforts at employee engagement fall short. And this occurs for 3 main reasons. Number one, because even though they assess the organization and employee opinion in a useful way, they often fail to take meaningful action to create long-term change. So they're not following up on the promise that they begin when they ask for people's opinion in the first place. Secondly, if they do take action, it's usually one-sided. And what I mean by that is that they're not involving employees in troubleshooting the issues, designing the solutions, developing the needed capabilities, or activating the change. And the third part, on top of those things, usually what happens is communications around the changes that are made are typically ineffective. And the employees often feel blindsided and that they have no control or influence over decisions that directly affect how they do their work.
So you're going to tell us a story today. Tell me about this organization. Why was a change needed?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is two parts today. First, we're going to tell you a success story. And it's a great success story, and I'm really happy to share it all with you. And then what we'll do after we tell the stories, we'll talk specifically about how communications were used to support the engagement work in the first place. So our work with this client goes back to 2012. It's a rural hospital in Ohio serving an aging community. And along with those challenges, they were also experiencing, and still are today, intense competitive pressure. And as a result, at that time, they were seeing a significant fall off in their volume and dwindling revenue. And the situation was worsened by layoffs they had to unfortunately make in 2010 through 2012 in both staff and management. So the combination of this storm was that the culture had become polarized. The main components were a unionized nursing staff, a non-unionized support staff, and contracted physicians. So it became a very disjointed organization. The leadership team itself was very disjunct. They did not trust one another, and they communicated poorly with one another and with the employees across the organization. And the resulting impact on the hospital's performance was significant. Lean staffing was causing employee burnout, frustration, high turnover, and employee morale was at an all-time low. Patient satisfaction ratings were below the 10th percentile in many categories, which is just not acceptable for most healthcare providers. Any healthcare provider, that's very low. Core quality measures were significantly below the desired standard. The employees had no faith in leadership. The management team was fragmented and had become completely disengaged themselves. Patient volume was dwindling. Provider referrals were steadily declining. So the hospital was definitely experiencing a huge crisis that it had to address.
I mean, it sounds like we're in a really, really tough spot. So what did they decide to do?
Well, basically, they came to us. We were referred to them through the Ohio Hospital Association, and we appreciate that. They came to us and asked us for our help in changing the culture and rebuilding trust in their leadership team and to try to turn the ship around. So our first task was to align the leadership team on the need for change. And in this case, the hospital just really had to embrace the significant change effort for their culture and the way their people work together to care for their patients. So we educated the leadership team on the approach we take to this kind of change and secured their commitment to staying true to that approach and seeing it through. And again, this wasn't easy to accomplish. Again, many of them mistrusted senior leadership and were very skeptical of their intent to make real change. They also did not trust one another. But the leadership team had to be rebuilt before we could ever hope of rebuilding the culture at large for the remaining organization.
So it sounds like at every level, nobody trusted anybody.
That's true. It was a significant challenge and a very complicated situation to address. So we had to be very methodical and make sure everyone understood what was going to happen and why. Mm-hmm. So we have in this slide, you see a presentation of the MPI approach to change. And the key to addressing these types of complex challenges is to place very heavy emphasis on preparation. So the first 3 phases of work in our model, in fact, are all about preparing the organization to change before you start to change it. So it starts, if you look at the diagram at the top, it starts with gathering the insights that are needed to understand the problems, their causes, and make good strategic decisions about what to do. And then we move into the development of that strategy to make sure it's relevant and it's going to be effective. And then the third part is building the capability. And this third step is the part that's often most overlooked. Before you can begin implementation, you really have to step back and analyze how capable the organization is to implement the change and ask some very key questions. Does it have the capacity to implement the change? What competencies need to be developed on its leadership and management teams? Does the organization need some level of restructuring to support the change with the right capability? How is leadership going to hold people accountable for their roles and responsibilities and support them as they address challenges along the way? And then finally, when all of this preparation is accomplished, what are they going to then do to create the activation plan and the timeline and implement it? So for the hospital in this story, this preparation was particularly critical. We needed to fully understand all of the issues and then prioritize those that were the most urgent first. We also needed to align the management team. It was fractured and dysfunctional to begin with, and it needed to come together as a team before the change could be effectively accomplished. And finally, but most importantly, we needed to take the time to show the leadership team how to engage all of the employees in the process so that they would embrace the change, take it to their own hearts, and invest their time and their energy and their dedication into making it happen.
So how long did the preparation part of the process take for the hospital?
Well, in this situation, it takes months and months of preparation and hard work. So again, as I said before, it's important to have some structure. So the slide that you're looking at now shows an overview of one way that we've used employee engagement to drive change. And this is the model that we did use for this client. If you start at the center of the diagram and then go out from there, we start with employee opinion. So we start with the employees. You can use surveys, focus groups, interviews of the supervisors and the managers. You can do organizational health assessments. The point is to make sure that we're getting a good picture of what's going on from the ground up at every level of the organization. So as you look at that diagram, when you go out to the next level, you see 4 quadrants. Those represent the 4 levels of employees in that organization. So we wanted to make sure that we were getting in touch with every single one of those levels. And then once that's accomplished, we've talked to everyone. Everyone's had an opportunity to express their voice. We take all of that information together, work with the leadership team to develop a strategy, set the priorities, and then align everyone together. And the way you do that is you work with everyone to create a shared vision of what your vision for change is. So people all feel that they have some skin in the game and that it means something to them. And then we define the gap between where they are and where they want to be, then clear goals and define everyone's roles and responsibilities.
That's amazing. I think that's a wonderful approach to that kind of huge, huge change. So what was revealed during this part of the process?
Well, the main revelation for the employees and the leadership team during the preparation was the reality that in order to create customer focus, in this case patient focus and patient-centered care, and provide the best possible patient experience along with cost-effective services and continuously improving quality and safety of care, we had to first start by building an employee-centered workplace. So patient-centered care starts with an employee-centered workplace. And that was a revelation for them in that it was going to change the way they did everything. And that the innovation, energy, the drive, and the accountability all needed to accomplish the things they wanted to accomplish had to start with their employees. And that's true no matter what industry you're in. And it had a profound effect on the people who worked there at every level. It changed the way they did everything together, the way they made decisions on a daily basis, the way they worked together as teams and solved problems, and innovated improvements to the services they provided. They were basically driving change from the bottom up instead of from the top down.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, when you're looking at the shape of a triangle, it seems like the bottom is where the strength comes from. So I think that's a great way to approach it.
Yes, and the great thing was that the customers and the patients noticed, you know, and ultimately it made a huge impact on the performance and the success of the organization.
Amazing. So tell me about the impact here.
So very quickly, we could spend a lot of time talking this, but I thought about everyone would like to see some data showing the results. So basically what you see here are some sample data on patient satisfaction scores from the year 2015. And this graph shows the improvement that was made in just 6 months in the hospital's percentile rankings for 10 different components of their Press Ganey patient satisfaction ratings. So the blue bars on the left are the scores for the emergency department, and the green bars on the right are for patient in services. The numbers that you see on the bars are percentile rankings. So if you look at the first one there on the left, it basically, you see a 12 there. That means that the hospital score in that category was only better than 12% of all the other hospitals that were evaluated. So not a good place to be. Once the employee team launched their project that had to do with patient satisfaction, the results surprised everyone, even them. In some cases, the scores rose over 60 percentile points in 6 months. So what you're seeing on that graph at the bottom are the first quarter scores compared to the third quarter scores on the top. And while the final rankings were still below the hospital's overall target, the level of improvement across the board was pretty dramatic. And the employees noted that the employee engagement effort, action team projects, and as well as improved communications were the chief reasons for the improvement in their opinion.
Now, you mentioned the action teams. I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about this idea. Tell me about these action teams.
Okay, so basically I want to tell you about one of the teams. This team was very interesting in that it was what we call a cross-functional team. Basically, it included members from different work groups across the hospital. So we had nurses, lab techs, maintenance technicians, housekeepers, imaging techs, people from the billing department, and then lots of staff from the ER on this team.
So it sounds like these are people that wouldn't have normally have interacted together on a project before.
You are absolutely correct. And one of the things they walked away with was a very much improved understanding of one another and the challenges they were facing in different areas of the hospital. It brought them together in a way they'd never had the opportunity to come together before.
Right.
So it had a big impact. And basically, this team worked together and decided that what they wanted to do was address the whole way the hospital was handling patient feedback and patient satisfaction. So on the Press-Ganey survey, patients would let them know, what they felt the hospital scored well on and what they did not. And basically what they came up with is that they wanted the employees in each unit to address the specific issues that were brought up for that unit. And how that was different was that prior to that, a committee of managers who usually were not directly involved with that unit would come up with a solution for the problem and then implement it. And needless to say, their solutions oftentimes were ineffective, and the employees often resented someone else telling them how to do their job.
And I could totally see that for an employee or a company that was struggling with employee engagement, those answers from the top wouldn't be as well received.
Correct. It just further distanced the employees from the management team. And not only did the team empower employees to innovate and solve problems, they also created a central database to track the projects so that different employee groups could share experiences and knowledge and learn from one another, so they didn't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. And the database also allowed a central oversight team to track projects and hold teams accountable for project management and for results. So it was very thorough.
It sounds like it.
So this graph shows you basically some output from an MPI employee survey report. So there's a lot of information here, but what I want to do is explain what you're looking at, and then we'll hone in on something very specific. Basically, it's in 3 sections. The section on the far right is for 2013, the section in the middle is 2014, and the section on the left is for 15 and 16. And just below the titles, you'll see red, yellow, and blue boxes. Basically, that's how we categorize the results, so it's easier to understand. And the red boxes are for unfavorable scores, the yellow boxes are for neutral scores, and the blue boxes are favorable scores. And so the goal is for the company to have as many favorable or agreeable responses as possible in every group of statements. So in 2013, that's the section over on the right, on the top line of data, you will see that the employee responses to those statements regarding vision, mission, and strategy was about 63% favorable and about 22% unfavorable. Now, we don't consider those to be particularly good results. We want to see a minimum of 70% favorability, but we prefer the scores to be 85 to 90% favorable. But if you move to the left, the point of showing you this graph is to compare what you see for 2013 to what was achieved in 15 and 16. And you'll see that the overall favorability scores for that line item for vision, mission, and strategy rose 20 percentage points, all the way up to almost 83%. And the unfavorability scores dropped over 16 percentage points. So that's what we would consider a wonderful result.
And even if in the average across all of those measures, you're really seeing a gain all across, so that's awesome.
Yes, it's a wonderful scorecard for the performance of the organization and the effort.
Yeah, so it seems like the hospital is kind of the perfect microcosm for the U.S. workforce as a whole. A lot of diversity and different positions and things like that, so it's actually a great example. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yes. So to kind of circle back now to where we started, now we've told this story, the success story of change. So let's go back and talk a little bit about communications and what was done with the communication strategy to support this change effort. In the case of the story of the hospital we've shared with you, poor communication was determined to be one of the main root causes of the huge distrust that the staff had with hospital leadership, and it could only be rebuilt through the opposite reality, very purposeful and authentic, effective communication. So our change process itself is built upon a foundation of embedding communication and new communication practices throughout the organization. So it's absolutely essential to plan that out very carefully and implement it exceptionally well if the change is going to be sustained over time and be successful. And I can give you an example. So an opinion survey itself is a form of communication, right? Mm-hmm. But it's just the first step in this long journey of change that we are talking about. And the organization has to be fully committed to seeing it through in order for the employees to learn to trust leadership and believe that things will improve. So beyond the survey, the amount of communication required to achieve this change is significant. It requires a great effort. And in fact, all of this change work that we just described for this hospital would never have been able to get off the ground if it hadn't been for a very robust communications plan. So the first step in this planning is to create a shared vision of the journey. And we talked about this a little bit before. It's how you onboard people into the change effort, but it's also how you keep your momentum. You keep reminding everyone of where we are, where we've been, and where we're trying to get.
Makes perfect sense.
Well, and the most important question for people then is to understand why. It's highly critical to make sure people understand where they're going, but also why they are going there, how they're going to get there, what is expected of them, what the goals are, and why they should care. So in other words, why should it be important to them? What's in it for them? Yeah. Is basically the main question. And so it's a critical step that organizations we find rarely dedicate enough time for. It's often executed very poorly, and it's the prime reason, in our opinion, why so many change efforts fail. It's just not enough for the vision to be shared by the leadership team. It has to be shared and advocated for by the entire organization. Every single member has to be singing the same song and dancing to the same tune, basically, so to speak. And even one dissenting or wavering voice, if they have enough influence, they can derail the entire train.
Now, I can see how knowing your organization's influencers would really help here, because those influencers could be in any position in the organization, but they have incredible pull.
Yes, they do, and you have to spend some time in advance identifying who they are. You're exactly right. So what we can do now is kind of dive into the methods of planning these types of communications and how they can be used to build culture and manage change. So once the vision for change is created and people understand their role and their responsibility during the journey, regular, consistent communication is critical, as I said before, to keep everyone moving in the same direction. And before anything else, what you have to do is create an emotional commitment. We need to inspire people to believe and trust, and in order to do that, we have to have both their heads and their hearts involved and dedicated to the change. We need to keep monitoring their thoughts and feelings, asking them to share their experiences, their concerns, and their ideas. We need to keep them informed and educated, and ultimately engage and empower them in helping to lead the change. This creates ownership and accountability that you need for employees to help you drive the change, because as a leader, it's important to remember you cannot do this by yourself. You've got to get everybody on board to help you and delegate as much of it as possible.
Yeah, it seems like that would save you a lot of work in the back end if you were to do that in the front end, get everybody on the bus before you decide to drive away.
A lot of work and a lot of frustration. Yes, and essentially what you're doing is you're transforming every employee into a leader and an advocate for the organization, and that really is the definition of a true leader, when you turn everyone else into one.
Yes, and what a wonderful gift for them as well.
Yes, so there are some key communication tools that we strongly suggest everyone include. The first place to start is with the timeline. Make it formal, put it in writing, because it will become your communications calendar. Everything will start from there. And it'll allow you to openly track where you are on the journey, but also share that with everyone else so that's transparent to them about where things are. And this is critical because you're inevitably going to experience some delays, and people need to understand that there is a delay, why there's a delay, and what's being done to get back on track. So transparency is critical to building trust. Mm-hmm. Another thing that you want to make sure you do is circulate regular leadership talking points and frequently ask questions to your leadership and management teams so that they're prepared to answer people's questions in a consistent way with the right messages. Use a newsletter or a regular employee bulletins to provide key information to employees and emphasize core themes that you want them to hear on a regular basis, and provide links to other information so you can see where they go and what they're curious about. That's really important as well. It'll help you, adjust your communication plan as you move through the journey. One critical thing is to tell the story from all points of view, particularly from the employee's point of view. And basically the guideline here is tell their story. Take team pictures, recognize leaders and team members, celebrate their progress, feature the employee teams in stories. Let your employees highlight the experience that they're having and the changes that they see, because that's what everyone is going to relate to. And then the last major point for this is make sure that you're establishing multiple forums for 360-degree communication. As communication planners, it is often easy for us to fall into a trap where we're just pushing information out and we're not asking to get information back. So you want to empower employees to exchange information, update folks. You want to give them opportunities and channels for feedback via polls and surveys and chat rooms and things like that. And then use multiple channels so that people can choose their own preference for communication. So basically, that's how Cerkl can be such an immensely helpful in this kind of a change effort and helping to create engagement. And that's why we love to work together with Cerkl so much. It allows the team to drive key messages and provide key information, but it also allows us to gather important data on the interests of everyone involved, involve them in relevant conversations, and raise their awareness of the issues. Engaging everyone creates visibility to change, but it also allows you to recognize people for their efforts and create a more unified team that's focused on the same goals.
So have you ever seen a plan fall apart due to lack of communication?
Yes, we've seen this happen when communication planning is not done well or it's not followed through on and falls off. And in fact, inauthentic communication that's poorly planned and executed is the primary reason we see change efforts like fail.
And that's got to be a heartbreaker when that happens.
It is, because it's just, requires so much work
right.
to get it off the ground and get everyone moving. So I wanted to give everybody real life examples of some of the tools and the way we use them. So what you see on this slide is actually a sample timeline from an actual client project. You can see this project has a 1.5-year timeline. It's composed of 3 stages or rounds. And the timeline you see here is for round 1 only. So basically what we did was we mapped all the major steps of this part of the project in a progression from left to right, assigned the dates that these things would be happening and the windows that we expected to see the results achieved. And the key here is to identify all the milestones that the organization is going to experience during the project's time frame so you can anticipate what the stakeholders who are impacted by the project will need and want to hear. And once those milestones have been identified, then what you see here in this slide is the next step in determining what we want to accomplish with those communications, what we want to say, who we're going to say it to, and which media we're going to use to reach each of the audiences. It's important right now at this stage to take the time to build an audience-centered approach because it will impact your choice of media and how you approach the group in terms of key messages, the images that you use, the tone, the voice, and other factors for your communications. And again, I know I can't say it enough, you want to use multiple media for each audience so that you can ensure that they're hearing the message more than once, that they're hearing it in the media that they prefer, and that they have the opportunity to provide feedback or input and have conversations. So in the example above, what you're seeing is we've selected just one part of this communications plan, the employee audience. It has been selected for focus here for the webinar, but understand we had multiple audiences in this plan. And you can also drill down into individual audience, into smaller target demographic groups, such as department, shift, age groups, gender groups if it's relevant, race groups if it's relevant, and job titles if you need to. This example's got a lot of choices on it, and in fact we would recommend, you're seeing kind of like an end product here. When you start this process, you want to start with just a few of them and build one at a time so that your portfolio of channels evolves over time. It's better to do a few things very well rather than do a lot of things sort of well.
I've been to a restaurant like that before. They try to do a little bit of everything, they don't do anything very well.
Yes, exactly right. And this is another reason why Cerkl can be so helpful, because it becomes the hub for pushing out so many of your communications. It also gives your audience members the ability to focus on what's meaningful for them, and it gives you the opportunity to monitor usage and see which channels and which topics appeal most to your target groups.
Now, I love this word cloud because I think it really paints the story of what you guys were able to do with this hospital. Tell them about this.
Well, if there's any one image that captures the journey, this one is it. And it really helps understand the incredible influence that proper communication planning can have, as well as employee engagement and all the things that the hospital went through to change things around. So basically what you're seeing here are two snapshots in time. The one on the left is the beginning, before we started the engagement, and the one on the right is 2 years later. So what we did was we asked employees to describe the work environment prior to starting the change initiative. And the words that they chose are shown here on the left. And you can see they're pretty oppressive. Distrust, disappointment, low morale, insecurity, and disrespect. You know, it's really sad.
It's a lot of uns and disses.
A lot of uns and a lot of disses.
sad word.
Yes, and just it was just very sad to see someone, everyone in that state, that frame of mind. Just 2 years later, after, frankly, a ton of hard work, determination, teamwork, and constructive conflict, leadership development, and effective communication, I can't say that enough, look how their perspective changed. Their new positive experience was profoundly different, and most of all, they felt appreciated, valued, respected, and inspiring. Talk about an empowered organization. They felt they were making a real difference for their patients and for their community, and they learned to trust their leadership again and love their work again.
See, that's amazing. There's a lot of impact in the words that they chose. Just seeing that difference side by side, I mean, that's the kind of organization that people want to work for.
Yes, you're exactly right. The other thing about properly planned communications is that they allow you to move from a randomized word-of-mouth based exchange to a very deliberate, systematic way of spreading information and influence throughout an organization. When we first started working with this hospital, everything spread by rumor. And not only was it random and it left out pockets of people, but oftentimes by the time the message got through the organization, it had morphed into
like telephone.
Yes, like playing telephone game. So it was just very destructive. So communications planning and putting all the structure in place can help you control the message and also help you spread the influence throughout the organization in a very systematic way so that no one gets left out. And again, I can't help it, but Cerkl is an incredible tool for accomplishing this because of the power of the data that can be used to gain insight into employee behaviors and perspectives and interests, and allow you to adjust your communications as you make your way through the journey. And this principle applies to any organization, not just hospitals like the one we told you about here today. This works for all kinds of industries, manufacturers, retailers, universities, municipalities, non-for-profits, you name it. It's the principle that makes the difference. So no matter who you are or what change you're leading, making sure you've spent the time and the energy up front to thoroughly plan your communications is going to help you make sure that you achieve the results you're looking for.
So how do you address the different demographics, generations that your messaging has to reach when you're in a large organization?
This is a great question. So we do a lot of work in what we call multicultural competence. Mm-hmm. And for us, that means a lot of things. But there are four main points I'd like to make here to your question about this. First is you want to make sure that your communications offer something of value to people of different cultures and backgrounds, no matter how basic the message may seem to be. Language, images, themes, channels, and messaging are so important in avoiding the isolation of individuals or groups and making sure that everyone feels included, involved, and respected. I saw a very interesting article today about our recent presidential election and how it was really reflective of many different groups in the United States that felt marginalized and left out. Mm-hmm. So it applies in all kinds of different situations. Culture is very complicated. It's shaped by many distinguishing factors, not just race, language, or gender, but also age, education, your job title, what department or area of the organization you work in, how you're classified, even your hobbies and interests or the high school you went to, as everyone in Cincinnati knows. So then the second thing is, make sure you do the work up front to identify your audiences and seek to understand first how they see things from their point of view. The important thing here is don't assume you know or presume you can figure it out. Go ask them what their preferences are for receiving and sharing information, giving feedback, and then create a plan. If it's not in writing, it's not real. They will appreciate the fact that you went to the effort, that you asked, and it will make your communications authentic and sincere. And this is particularly important for an effort like the one we described with this hospital when we were working so hard to rebuild trust in leadership. This kind of work had to happen. Just be sure to follow up and honor their preferences so they feel heard and valued and that they are receiving a personalized message as much as possible.
And we see the value in this every day at Cerkl. You know, that people really appreciate being heard and getting the information that they want and that they've asked for, and an organization honoring that they're an individual.
Now, the third point is that it may seem obvious, but it gets overlooked so many times. Branding is everything. Mm-hmm. Not just visual branding like logos and colors and font styles, but also in messaging as well. So there's some key questions to ask. Do your communications reflect and affirm the values of the company? What is the employee's experience when they receive these communications? Does it match those values? And is it in alignment with the things that you're trying to achieve in your corporate culture? If your company, for example, values collaboration, do your communications and channel selections reflect and support collaboration? Do they make that value a reality? And do you feature collaboration as a learning topic in your forums and your educational, interactions with folks? Do you recognize and reward people who collaborate exceptionally well? And do you hold people accountable for collaboration in their performance reviews? So that's an example of how, and it's branding. It's branding. It's employer branding.
It is, and I think that if anyone can write a mission and vision, but it takes a lot of work to live that mission and vision in every single piece of your organization, all the way down to performance reviews. That's exactly a big cultural change.
Exactly right. And communication strategy is key to making that come to life the way it should. And then finally, the fourth point in response to your question is finally don't assume that people know the basics. Mm-hmm. For example, I see this a lot around pay and benefits packages. They're often not communicated out to employees. They may be told what they are and what their options are, but the company hasn't necessarily let them know how to compare them to other offerings on the market or appreciate the organization's philosophy on compensation and benefits and how they tie into the company's vision and mission. Do they know what opportunities they have to earn raises and how to get there? A lot of times that's not explained very well. You also need to tell them more than once, and this is where the channel strategy comes in and is so helpful. And again, I've said it before, but I'll say it again, using multiple channels or media to tell the story and exchange information is a very effective way of ensuring that your communication strategy is going to work.
And I can completely see that. I've worked for an employer before that communicated their benefits in a very clear way by showing me that my salary was just one part of my compensation package, and also allowing me to compare health insurance plans with real life examples about which one might be most advantageous. And I think it led to a trust level and also made me appreciate my benefits more. I think that's really cool. Cerkl can provide that engagement channel. We can tell that story over and over and over again to effective, beautiful communications. With Cerkl, it's not really about having more content. It's about getting your content to the right staff. So on the left, you have your news, your what's going on, the events, the solicitations, Join United Way, whatever it may be. You have all of that over here, and on the right, you have your employees. And we provide a bridge between those two things, delivering personalized newsletters that's going to tell your organization's story. But that's just really one piece of our puzzle. We also are going to give you the keys to the engagement test with, telling you what they're interested in and what they're clicking on and what they're not, who's becoming more engaged, who's becoming less engaged. Where you can predict an employee's departure. If you see a massive drop in engagement, you're going to want to know why they're not connecting with you anymore. What about your messaging? What stories do they want to hear more of? We tell you exactly what people are interested in, and I think that's where we really shine. So, Maureen, to summarize, what are the most important components that organizations need to remember on this whole journey?
So I have 8 short ones.
Just 8 simple steps.
Just 8 simple things. Well, first, start with the data. Like we said, start with the insights. Make sure you thoroughly understand the things that need to change and be prepared to measure the impact. The second one is create a shared vision so that everyone understands the journey ahead. The third is give everyone a role and responsibilities and set clear goals so that they have opportunities to participate and own the improvements. The fourth is to prepare carefully. Make sure everyone has what they need to be successful before you start and also along the way. Number 5, plan your communications ahead at every step of the journey. Make them proactive, interactive, and reflective of the culture you're trying to build. 6, tell the story from everyone's point of view, not just yours. 7, measure and regularly report progress, recognize effort, and celebrate everyone's achievements. And 8, finally, be inclusive and respectful and encourage innovation through diversity and create an open environment that fosters constructive conflict.
This was all wonderful information. Maureen, I want to thank you. Now, we're opening it up for questions right now, and you can just put them in the chat box. We're here to answer any questions that you might have. But what's one thing people should take away from this webinar? What's the one important consideration or suggestion? I have a feeling it might be about communication.
Yes, in fact it is. That's the theme for the day. And basically, we want to make sure that everyone understands that communication is almost always shortchanged. It's always at the bottom of the list instead of at the top of the list. And it should be one of your very first priorities to make sure that you're carefully planning what you say along the entire way.
And how do you know an organization is primed for this kind of massive level change? What are some of the factors you see going into before they call you?
Well, commonly it's a sense of there's something, usually a crisis, that's driving it. There's a need that's come up, or an event has occurred and a situation has to be addressed right away. What we see, for example, in companies that are union-free, if a group of employees has filed a petition to organize, that's one of the most common ones we see.
Okay.
We'll also see when organizations are merging and they're trying to bring together disparate cultures and they need to figure out how to create one culture from the two. That's also a common situation where people will call us. The third one is when they know that employees are not satisfied and that they have objections or concerns about either their pay or more commonly how their pay is determined. Then there's also, they need help figuring out how they need to adjust those things. So, and also leadership changes. That's probably the fourth one. If, a CEO has resigned or someone else in the organization has resigned, how does the organization weather that transition period and move on to new leadership?
That makes a big difference. Now, if anyone wants to reach out to Maureen, feel free to email her there with what's on the screen. After the webinar, I'll send out a link to this recording as well as a link to her LinkedIn, the website, everything. Their website is fantastic. It has a lot of articles about leadership and employee engagement, so I really suggest if this is a topic that interests you that you check that out. If you have any questions about Cerkl, feel free to email me as well. I want to thank you guys all for being here today. Thank you, Maureen, so much. You were awesome.
It was my pleasure. So are you.
Thank you so much and have a great day.